He handed her the termination notice in front of 60 people and told the room she was a relic. Gavin Marsh, CEO of Vertex Solutions, stood at the front of the all-hands meeting with the particular confidence of a man who has never been wrong in front of an audience, pointed at Loretta Vance where she sat in the third row, and said the company's earliest years were amateur hour that needed to be buried. Loretta's hand stayed flat on her notepad. She did not look up. What Gavin didn't know was that the company's attorney, sitting in the back row with a leather briefcase on his lap, had been waiting for this moment for 11 minutes. And that on line 7 of the founding documents, inside that briefcase, Loretta Vance's name appeared above Gavin Marsh's entire career, 14 years earlier. This is where it started. The first time Loretta Vance rented office space for Vertex Solutions, it was a converted storage room above a print shop in Tempe, Arizona. 400 square feet with one window. A ceiling fan that wobbled badly enough that the landlord had taped a warning sign to the wall beneath it, and a lease that cost $800 a month she paid from her personal savings account. She'd driven to that first meeting in a 2003 Civic with 112,000 miles on it and a passenger seat full of manila folders because she didn't own a filing cabinet yet. She was 47 years old, had spent 19 years in enterprise software implementation, and had watched 3 different employers build mediocre products on top of the exact same structural problem. A problem she had solved in a notebook during a flight back from Denver in 2007, and spent the following 2 years turning into working code in her spare time. Vertex Solutions existed because Loretta had been too stubborn to let a good idea die. She'd co-founded it with a man named Dennis Pryor, her former colleague, and the only person she'd shown the notebook to. Dennis handled the sales conversations, while Loretta handled everything else: the product, the back-end architecture, the client onboarding documentation, the contracts, the hiring process for their first 3 employees, the quarterly tax filings she'd taught herself at a library computer because they couldn't yet afford an accountant. She was the one who answered emails at 11 at night. She was the one the first client called when something broke. She was the one the second client called, and the third. The company was, in every meaningful sense, the extension of 14 years of her accumulated intelligence applied without pause to a single problem. The early years were not amateur hour. They were survival, which is the hardest professional credential there is to earn. By year 4, Vertex had 14 employees, 3 enterprise clients, and a product that 2 industry analysts had cited in separate reports as solving a category problem no competitor had yet addressed. By year 7, they'd taken a Series A at a valuation that made Loretta sit alone in her car in a parking garage for 20 minutes, processing what her 40% equity stake was now worth. Dennis, who was better at celebrating than Loretta, took the team to dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins and called it the best night of his life. Then the cash crisis. Year 8. A client contract fell through. 2 others delayed payment. Payroll was due in 9 days. The board offered a solution: buy back a significant portion of founder equity at a fair but not generous price. Use the capital to bridge the gap, stabilize the company, and keep building. Loretta owned 40%. She sold 37%. Dennis sold less. His personal finances were more cushioned. His ask was smaller. After the transaction, Loretta held 3%. Enough to keep her connected. Not enough to drive decisions. She stayed. Everyone assumed she stayed because she needed the income. She stayed because 14 years of her life were in the walls of that building, and she was not the kind of woman who walked away from something she'd built because the math had temporarily turned against her. She took a reduced title: office manager. She handled the systems, the onboarding processes, the operational documentation that kept a growing company from tearing itself apart at the seams. She knew every vendor contract, every client relationship history, every password and process and institutional memory that existed nowhere else. The newer employees called her by her first name and had no idea who she was. That was fine. She didn't need them to know. What none of them knew, what Gavin Marsh would have known if he'd done what any thorough incoming CEO does and read the founding documents, was that Loretta Marie Vance's name appeared in the company's original Articles of Incorporation, its shareholder agreement, and its early operating procedures with the designation she'd earned and never advertised, co-founder. But then, something changed. Gavin Marsh joined Vertex Solutions as CEO 8 months ago, brought in by the board to drive the company toward a Series C and a potential acquisition. He was 38 years old, had scaled 2 previous companies, one to exit, one to implosion that he described in interviews as a learning experience, and had the kind of energy that fills a room immediately and exhausts it by the following afternoon. He wore tailored shirts with the sleeves rolled to the elbow in every public setting. He talked about company culture constantly and changed it in ways no one had agreed to. He used the word lean in every third sentence, which the engineering team began using as a drinking game, though not in his presence. His instinct, from the first week, was renovation. Not in the physical sense, though he did replace the lobby furniture with something he described as elevated minimal and the engineering team described as uncomfortable. In the institutional sense, he wanted the company to look like what it was becoming, not what it had been. He said this in his first all-hands meeting. He said it in the investor update. He said it in the press release that accompanied the announcement of his hire. The phrase he used most often, in the context of the company's history, was "We've evolved past that." Every Monday at 9, Gavin held a leadership stand-up that ran exactly 30 minutes by timer. He was precise about this, which the team had initially read as respect for their schedules, and later understood as the efficiency of a man who found extended engagement with other people's thinking inconvenient. He spoke in the first half. Questions came in the second. He answered the questions he found interesting and rephrased the ones he didn't into something he preferred. Within 3 months, the number of people who asked questions at stand-up had dropped from 11 to 4. Loretta attended these meetings. She asked no questions. She watched the 4 who still did. Loretta watched all of this. She filed it the same way she filed everything, carefully, completely, without drama. She'd seen new leadership arrive before. She knew that the first instinct of a man hired to transform something is to treat its history as an obstacle. She gave him room. She answered his questions when he asked them, which was rarely and always in passing, and did not volunteer information he hadn't sought. She noticed, at week 3, that he'd skipped the company history section of the CEO onboarding package his assistant had prepared. She knew, because she had designed that package. The section included, among other materials, a copy of the founding documents. She said nothing about this to anyone. She noticed, at week 6, that he'd referred to the company's founding in a media interview as Dennis Pryor's vision. Dennis had left the company 3 years earlier to pursue other ventures. He had not been consulted for the interview. He called Loretta afterward and said he was sorry. She told him not to be. She said it would sort itself out. She believed that, in the way of someone who has been patient for a very long time and knows that patience is not passivity, it is timing. At month 4, Gavin began reorganizing the company's departmental structure. He announced that several administrative and operational roles would be consolidated. He mentioned, in a meeting with department heads, that Loretta was not invited to attend, that the company had accumulated what he called legacy overhead. people and positions whose value predated the current growth trajectory and hadn't scaled alongside it. The department head who attended that meeting and who had been at Vertex for 6 years looked at the table while Gavin said it and did not speak. A list circulated 2 weeks later. Loretta's name was on it. She learned this from the HR director, a woman named Priya who had been at Vertex for 4 years and who came to Loretta's desk at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon with the expression of someone about to say something that costs them something. Priya closed the door. She showed Loretta the list. She said she wanted to give her time to prepare, that the announcement would happen at the monthly all-hands in 2 weeks, and that she was sorry, and that this was not her decision, and that she didn't understand why someone who clearly knew this company better than anyone was being treated like expendable overhead. Loretta thanked her. She said she appreciated the warning. She said Priya had done the right thing. After Priya left, Loretta sat quietly at her desk for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. She knew the duration because she watched the clock. And then she picked up her phone and called the company's founding attorney, a man named Robert Osai, who had drafted the original Articles of Incorporation 14 years ago, and who had attended every significant legal moment in Vertex Solutions' history since. She told him what was happening. She told him the date of the all-hands. She asked him to be in the room. He said he'd clear his calendar. Remember this detail. It matters more than anything that comes before it. The all-hands meeting was held on a Thursday at 10 in the morning in the company's main conference space, a renovated room that Gavin had renamed the Bridge in his first week, replacing the whiteboard that Loretta had bought in year 2 with a floor-to-ceiling smart screen. 61 employees. Folding chairs arranged in rows. Gavin at the front with a wireless microphone and the tailored shirt with the sleeves rolled. He spent the first 18 minutes talking about the Series C pipeline, the acquisition conversations that were progressing, the direction of the product roadmap, the future. He was good at the future. It was the one topic on which his confidence was never strained by the friction of actual history. Then he reached the restructuring section. He said it plainly, which Loretta would later reflect was the one thing she hadn't fully anticipated, that he would do it plainly, without euphemism or even the courtesy of corporate softening. He said the company had to shed legacy weight to move at the speed the next phase required. He said not every person who was right for an earlier version of Vertex was right for what Vertex was becoming. He said this was not a reflection of individual failure, but of organizational evolution. He used the phrase amateur hour about the company's early years. And then he looked directly at the third row and said that some of the company's longest tenured support staff had become comfortable in roles that no longer served the company's direction. He held up a manila envelope. He walked to the third row. He set it on Loretta Vance's notepad. He said, in front of 61 people, that her position was being eliminated effective the end of the month, that HR would assist with the transition, and that he appreciated her years of service to the Vertex family. The room went so quiet that the air conditioning was audible. Loretta looked at the envelope on her notepad. She did not pick it up. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were level. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose. In the back row, Robert Osai unclipped the latch on his leather briefcase. Gavin had turned back toward the front of the room. He was already moving on, already pulling up the next slide on the smart screen, already pivoting to product timeline, the efficiency of a man who considers uncomfortable moments as things to be moved past rather than things to be resolved. Loretta spoke. She said his name clearly, Gavin, in a voice that carried without being raised, and the room's silence amplified it into every corner. Gavin turned. His expression held its executive composure, the practiced calm of someone who expects to manage whatever is coming. She said she had a question before the meeting continued. He said, of course. She said she wanted to understand something about the term he'd used, amateur hour, and whether that was his characterization of the period covered by Vertex Solutions' founding documentation. Gavin's expression didn't change. He said the company had evolved significantly from its early operational stage. Yes, he said that was the point. She said she was asking specifically because she had reviewed the founding documents recently and wanted to make sure his understanding of that period was accurate. Something shifted behind Gavin's eyes. Not alarm yet. Confusion. A small recalibration of the room's temperature that he was registering without yet understanding the source. He said he was familiar with the company's history. She said she was glad to hear it. Then Robert Asai stood up from the back row. He was 61 years old, wore a suit that Loretta knew had been made for him in London, and moved through the folding chairs toward the front of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has spent 4 decades in rooms where things were decided. Gavin watched him come without recognition. Robert introduced himself. He said he was the founding attorney for Vertex Solutions and had served as the company's primary legal counsel since its incorporation 14 years ago. He said he was here today in a formal capacity. He opened the briefcase and produced a document, a clean copy of the original Articles of Incorporation. Notarized, date stamped, unambiguous, and held it so that the front row could see the cover page. He said he wanted to draw the room's attention to the signatory page. Gavin's jaw tightened. He said he didn't understand what was happening. Robert said he would explain. He said the Articles of Incorporation named 2 co-founders, Dennis Allen Pryor and Loretta Marie Vance. He said both names appeared on line 7 of the signatory page, above the notary seal, dated 14 years ago. He said that in addition to her founding status, Miss Vance retained a 3% equity stake in Vertex Solutions, which at the company's current valuation, the valuation Gavin had cited in the first 18 minutes of this same meeting, represented an ownership interest of approximately $4.1 million. He set the document on the table beside the smart screen. He said that as counsel, he wanted to flag that the public characterization of the company's founding period as amateur hour, made in front of 61 employees immediately preceding the termination of a co-founder, would require the company's legal team to review the termination for potential issues related to founder equity agreements, reputational harm, and the specific protections written into the original shareholder documents. He said that review would begin today. He said he was also available to answer any questions the board might have, several of whom he had already briefed this morning. He said he wanted to make sure everyone in the room was fully informed. He sat down. The silence that followed was a different kind than the silence after Gavin had handed Loretta the envelope. That silence had been shock. This silence was understanding. It was 61 people doing the same math at the same speed and arriving at the same answer, that the man at the front of the room had stood in a building that a woman in the 3rd row had built, called that building's origin story amateur hour, handed her a termination notice, and had not known, had never thought to learn, who she was. Several people in the room had worked at Vertex for 4, 5, 6 years. Not one of them had been there at the beginning. Not one of them had ever thought to ask. The weight of that landed differently on different faces, on some as embarrassment, on some as the particular discomfort of realizing you have been incurious about something that mattered, and on a few as something closer to fury at having watched and said nothing. Gavin Marsh's hands were still. His face had gone from composed to something that was working very hard to remain composed and not quite achieving it. He looked at the document on the table. He looked at Loretta. She met his eyes without expression, the way a woman looks when she has been waiting a long time for a moment to arrive and finds it exactly where she expected. He said, carefully, that he thought it would be best to continue this conversation outside of the all-hands format. Loretta said she agreed. She picked up the termination envelope from her notepad, stood, and walked to the front of the room. She placed the envelope on the table beside the founding documents. She looked at it for one moment. Then, she looked at Gavin. She said she'd be in the conference room when he was ready. She walked out through a room that did not make a sound. Within 72 hours, 3 board members had requested emergency calls with Robert Asai. The termination notice was formally rescinded in writing by end of business Friday, with a letter from the board chair that acknowledged the error in process and affirmed Loretta's founding status and her position with the company. The letter included no admission of the public nature of what had occurred in the all-hands. Robert filed a letter on Loretta's behalf noting that omission and requesting a correction. A second letter arrived the following Monday. It was more complete. Gavin Marsh remained CEO for another 6 weeks. His departure was announced as a mutual decision made in light of evolving company direction. The press release thanked him for his contributions. It did not mention the all-hands meeting. It did not mention Loretta. 3 weeks after he left, the board chair called Loretta directly and asked what she needed to stay. She told him. He said yes to all of it. 9 months later, Loretta Vance stood at the front of a room she'd stood in many times before. The same main conference space, same 60-plus chairs, the smart screen Gavin had installed still on the wall, but now running a slide that said Vertex Solutions. Year 15 in the company's original brand typeface. A typeface Loretta had chosen in a converted storage room above a print shop in Tempe in the year the company began. Her title on the new organizational chart, Chief Operating Officer. Her equity, following a board-approved restoration of a portion of her original position, 6.2%. Her salary, what she had always been worth and never been paid. She spoke for 11 minutes. She talked about the storage room, about the ceiling fan with the warning sign underneath it, about Dennis Pryor, whom she'd called the night before, and who sent his regards and his genuine happiness, which she believed because she knew him. She talked about the cash crisis in year 8 and what it had taken to sign those papers and what it had taken to stay. She said that a company is not its pitch deck or its Series C valuation, or the CEO it imports to perform transformation. A company is its founding idea, relentlessly applied by people who refuse to abandon it when things get hard. She said she had refused. She was still here. And she intended to remain. Priya, in the 4th row, was the first person to stand. The rest of the room followed in the way a room follows when the gesture is true. Not performance, not obligation, but the recognition of something that deserved to have been recognized a long time ago. Afterward, Loretta walked back to her office, her new office on the executive floor, with a window that faced east and caught the early morning light over the city. On the desk, her original notebook from the flight back from Denver. The one where she'd solved the problem. The one she'd never thrown away. She set her coffee down beside it and looked out the window at Phoenix spreading itself in the morning sun, at the particular quality of desert light that is entirely uninterested in what anyone has decided to call anything. She had work to do. She always had work to do. She sat down and began.